Welcome to the Look Good, Move Well podcast.
All right. Well, thank you everyone for joining us for the episode today. We are joined for the third time in a row by Coach and Dr. Adam Fetter, functional bodybuilding master coach, big key contributor to our Persist program. A lot of resources that are in that program are, the hard work and of you. And so thank you for being on the show again.
It's great to be on the show again. And
in reality, you've just been in that same seat for the last 2 hours. We've just done 3 episodes in a row.
Yeah, I feel bad. I might be stinking up Satya's chair. Just getting a little bit of back sweat on the pillow over here.
Make us closer.
Yeah, exactly.
So you're here for a few days, and tomorrow you have, some epic hiking plan. What's your hiking plan for tomorrow?
Yeah, we have a nice long loop, a kind of dipsy trail, parts of dipsy. One of our other coaches, Andrew, he's a big runner, and he gave me a trail. He said, just, hey, do this. I think it's like a 9-mile loop that we'll do, and that'll be the first half of the day, and then we're going to drive up to Point Reyes and do another hike up there. I remember when I was here in 2019, I had gone on that hike by myself, and I didn't understand that there was an elk sanctuary on the hike.
Yeah.
And so I'm walking, and I'm just hundreds of elk everywhere. It's one of the most mind-blowing experiences I've ever had. So it's like, yeah, I want to revisit that again as well. So probably like 15-ish miles of hiking on Saturday. So it'll be good.
Wow. Cool. Do you carry what do you put in your, what kind of things you carry with you on a big hike like that?
Yeah, we actually didn't bring any sort of backpack. I was going to ask you potentially to borrow a backpack for that day. So can I borrow a backpack for that day?
I got plenty of rucks. You don't even have to put weight in them, but they're great packs. I've got many.
Yeah, to me, y'all. I don't like to eat a lot or even drink that much during hikes like that. I did the Grand Canyon a couple years ago, I know some people go rim to rim. I just went all the way down from one side and then back up on the same side. And I think I had an orange and a handful of almonds and some water throughout the whole thing. And, it was pretty fine. I think my nutrition from the day before, I just made sure to eat a bunch and drink a bunch of water the day before. And
you were set.
I was set.
Yeah. Oh gosh, I don't want to get too detoured on that, but what do you think? I remember I was there at one point hiking down at the Grand Canyon, and the signs are they're intimidating. It's basically calling me out. If you think you're fit, you're probably going to get stranded down here. Take water. It's telling you it's cool up here. When you get down to the bottom, it's going to be really hot and it's going to be hard to climb back out. Here Adam is just a couple almonds, orange, and
Well, one of the great parts about that hike, or great for some people, maybe not great for other people, is you go down and you think you're at close to the bottom, and then you turn a corner, it's oh wow, there's another bottom. Oh. And then that happens over and over, where it's just you start seeing more and more bottoms because you can't actually see the bottom from the top. So you don't really understand how far you're going until you do get all the way down there.
Wild.
So be safe if you are gonna
for sure.
Maybe have more than an orange and almonds just to be case.
Adam's different in a lot of ways, so you don't have to try and replicate his behaviors.
Don't take him as
I don't like to eat, or drink for days.
Just test myself,
in the hottest canyon in the world, but
Adam scenario.
Yeah. I'd be okay, I could do that. Medevac. All right. Well, so today we're going to be talking about. I guess the way I position this is, you've had a lot of experience helping people out of pain, or as in orthopedic clinics, you were a physical therapist, people that are just maybe post surgery, or people that were maybe going to try and navigate the surgical route. It's how do we get you out of pain, or how do we get you off the operating table back to functioning? And so we're going to kind of bucket that as the physical therapy world. Mm-hmm. And then you're over here and you have athletes and clients and yourself who are looking to try and PR their lifts and, express the highest potential in physical activity that they have. Mm-hmm. And those are very like opposite ends of the spectrum. Like I'm just starting to try and move my body again without damaging it and without pain. And I'm over here like purposefully riding the line between damaging my body and pushing my threshold so that I can achieve things physically that I, didn't think possible. And I think maybe a lot of, well, I don't want to make any assumptions about the listener, but I know that I can kind of bounce back and forth between the two. Maybe we were talking about this yesterday where it was like, I'll go through periods where I'm just like, I'm hard charging. I want to be the best. I want to lift more. I want to be, and then something gets tweaked and I'm like, okay, my whole focus is on physical therapy. Like I got to just stay over here and I got to like think about longevity and sustainability. I got to do I got to just take it down a notch because that sucked. I don't want to be on that end. And then eventually you start to feel better and you're like, oh, how do I push it? So today I want to talk about like, what is the middle ground? And if you are somebody who is trying to get the most out of yourself physically, you're trying to express yourself as an athlete, you want to lift heavier, you want to progressively overload, set PRs, do things, what are the 3 or 5 like most fundamental philosophical PT things that you can bring into that experience so that you're essentially like, I'm getting after it, but I'm doing what's necessary so that I don't break down. And it's kind of like, rather than see, the idea of like bulletproofing and like doing like the sustainable work is like boring and I only do that when I'm hurt. It's like, how does that become part of a like, I'm getting after it approach to fitness and training?
Yeah, I think to give even more context to this conversation, I moved away from the traditional PT setting because in the PT setting, the environment wasn't set up to get someone who is into training or who does really prioritize movement as a part of their life. That environment didn't allow me to do that. And of course it has its time and place, and there's certainly the right person at the right time for the traditional physical therapy setting, but I left that setting because I was seeing so many holes, and I only had 45 minutes to work with this person, and I had to like get them through the best possible workout treatment in that 45 minutes as I could, while also trying to explain to them that nutrition and hydration and good sleep is all a part of this equation, and there just wasn't enough time. And so I had to resort to more of the traditional PT method, which was, hey, your back hurts, okay, we do dead bugs, clamshells, and prone press-ups, and we're just going to do that until you get better, right? So I think that seeing that firsthand was my first cue in of like, how are we going to help these people navigate pain and injury without out of the traditional PT setting.
Yeah. So Danielle, go ahead.
Yeah, I mean, I was just thinking through how unique in some ways the functional bodybuilding approach is with regards to this, because I think that if I take a step back and think about the general athlete's understanding of strength training, I don't see a lot of mobility and physical therapy type movements represented in that. And it's something that we have built into our training so that I think that our training method represents a combination of the things that allow you to really get after it and the things that keep you sound. But I don't know that we've ever fully like broken down that formula of like, how much of each can you kind of get away with, and like, how can you make the unsexy more sexy? And I'd love to hear where you're at and how your thinking has evolved in this.
Yeah, so if any of my clients are listening, they're going to be like, oh, this guy's a broken record. But a good warm-up, good full range of motion training where you're intentional with the movement quality and the speed in which you're moving, and a good cool down, in my opinion, is all you need to manage and potentially treat any injury, any pain. The same things the same outcomes I was looking to achieve in the physical therapy clinic can, in my opinion, be achieved with a good warm-up, with good intentional training through full range of motion and a good cool down. And I know this, Marcus, we've talked about that concept a lot, and helping people to understand how to do those things better. Everybody knows they should do a warm up, they should do a cool down, and they should, train as best as they possibly can. But continuing to help people really understand how to do those things well, in my opinion, is the recipe for navigating these injuries, or sort of bridging that gap between what's occurring in the physical therapy clinic and what's occurring in the training world. Doing those things well is the bridge between those two things.
So much of what you and I end up talking about when it comes to like building training designs and warm-up protocols is not what's the best protocol to use. It's what's the best way to deliver it so that people actually do it.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
Right? Because it's like, okay, this warm-up was, this warm-up took someone 10 minutes to do. They did it a couple times. Like, it's taking too long. I want to get to training. And they stopped doing the warm-up.
Mm-hmm.
Shit. Let's make it 5 minutes. And then they'll do it. And they'll do it every time because it's only 5 minutes. Same thing with like a cool down. It's like, okay, well, what's the right dose of this to just get people to actually show up and complete the task. Mm-hmm. Same thing with range of motion. It's like, well, what exercises can we select that promote best range of motion? Mm-hmm. What tempo can we select that promotes best range of motion? What rep ranges can we select that promote best range of motion? Like, even today in our training, it's like when I was only hitting, when we're doing, if the reps went down a little bit and the weights went up, I felt a lot more inclined to cut a rep range short, and not move with as great a range of motion because it was heavy, which meant my body felt vulnerable, and therefore I didn't want to take it to end range. Mm-hmm. So again, like a good warm up, good range of motion, good cool down. Yes. Is there a perfect prescription for that in every movement, in every circumstance? Maybe, but the best prescription is the one that you're going to do, mm-hmm. and you're going to do it repeatedly, mm-hmm. and you're going to do it over and over again. And I think we've had like the conversation about like people doing mobility sessions that like are 45 minutes long, 30, 45, 60 minutes long. It's like, and you do one of those and you're like, well, that was a lot, mm-hmm. I'm not going to do that again. Mm-hmm. It's like, well, if you just did 5 minutes every day and you never missed a day, it's like, that's going to stack way better than, I got to do this 30-minute protocol after each training session.
Yeah, something I used to think about this a lot when I was in the physical therapy clinic of, okay, I need this person to do some form of hamstring stretching. I know the best hamstring stretch is to do it this way. But for this person, I know they're going to do it way more often if they can be on their back, have a belt or towel on their foot, and they can just relax and be lazy through that stretch. And that frequency of doing it and consistency of doing it was far more important, to your point, than what's the best singular option.
Yeah.
Okay, well, I just have to push back a little bit here because 2 episodes ago, we were talking about just going ham in the gym and how like the culture of effort and like the dungeon mentality is like, really important to have the proper stimulus to change and adapt. And, I think that there's like this big question that keeps coming up for me, which is like, well, how much? Like, how much of that and how much of this? And I mean, I think it is very important to structure a training session so that you can do these things consistently and you don't skip the part where it is the range of motion. But I mean, I overheard you talking about Sam's training, I think, and you were like, yeah, there's something to be said for just like no range of motion, just like going ham on it. So, I mean, how do you reconcile all that?
Yeah, I think something we know as a strength and conditioning world or PT world is that moving a joint through a full range of motion at a relatively high frequency is a great way to keep that joint healthy. And I know the example I always tell my clients is there's a lot of research on sort of Eastern culture hip pathology and then Western culture hip pathology, because in a lot of Eastern cultures, they're spending a lot of time near and on the floor in a squat position, and just exploring that range more often leads to way less hip pathology. And so to your point, Satya, I think if, you can train at a really high intensity, but if you do it really, really well, Meaning, like you were talking a little bit, Marks, about exercise selection. Let's say we take a goblet cyclist squat and we put a 5-1-x1 tempo on that goblet cyclist squat. You're
Nate's
trained
over there shaking his head like, dude,
absolutely not. It sounds nasty, It sounds
Don't wanna
it sounds a
do
little bit nasty, but to my point of, you can drive a really high intensity, but I would select that exact same exercise with that tempo in the PT clinic because it can be a rehabilitation exercise as well for someone.
Yeah.
Hey, move with a lot of intention, really slow and controlled, get a really good stimulus, give yourself time to recover from that stimulus, and now you're going to be stronger, you're going to be more resilient, and ultimately preventing injury or improving from an injury is trying to make your body more resilient. And the tools that we select in training are doing exactly that.
Well, and it's interesting because like effort, like the intensity or the effort that you give in a movement or on a given exercise is an independent variable to the things you've already discussed around, like, let's say range of motion.
Mm-hmm.
Because you can go really intense with, partial range of motion, not a lot of control, or you can use a similar perceived level of effort with full range of motion, lots of control.
Mm-hmm.
And is one better than the other? I guess that question can only be answered in the context of like, what's the goal?
Mm-hmm.
What is this person? How resilient is this person? Like, the Ronnie Coleman approach, like, worked really well for Ronnie and his goal.
Mm-hmm.
And by all measures of like his success, like he did it perfectly.
Mm-hmm.
Now somebody who looks at him 15 years later and sees that his body has broken down after 8 Mr. Olympia titles, but his body's broken down, they might, and they have a bias towards like longevity, they might look at it and be like, well, that was dumb. That was broken. Versus somebody else looks at him 15 years later and they are an aspiring Olympia competitor.
Mm-hmm.
They're like, I will do whatever it takes. I'd be in a wheelchair if it meant I could get 8 Olympia titles. Like, what's driving you? And then furthermore, you mentioned Sam Sulek. So I don't even know how to say his last name, but he's he's a very viral, YouTube sensation, bodybuilder, young guy who goes and brings a tremendous amount of intensity to his training, and he doesn't practice full range of motion. He doesn't practice a lot of control. He kind of just like, handles and moves weight around, and it's extremely effective for him. And he has a very clear goal. He's relatively resilient at this age, and with his background and what he's doing, and that leads to a lot of tension on his muscles that allows them to grow. But that's his lens, that's his goal, that's his focus. And I think a lot of people who listen to us, and certainly my bias is like, well, gosh, I've been doing this long enough and I've had enough, injuries and enough setbacks, and I've experienced the negative emotional consequences of going through, psychological consequences of going through injuries and setbacks where I can't express myself the way I want to. Like, I don't want to trade, there's probably no amount of physical success that I could have that would make me feel good about, like, I can't ever squat again, or I can't ever lift my arm again. So I'm always looking for what are those levers, or what are those key things that I can do to give myself the best chance at having good function in my joints for the rest of my life, but won't stop me from being intense. I guess that is it. It's like, you don't have to be in a PT clinic where arguably people don't think people go to PT clinics and like work their asses off. They do. Some people do. A lot of people don't. A lot of people are like, kind of going through the motions. But, a physical therapy approach, or, kind of like, I'm using air quotes for people who aren't watching. It's like this mentality, or this concept of like, we're doing things to like keep you put together and keep you sound. That doesn't mean that you're like excluding. Intensity is not a different route. It can be woven together.
Mm-hmm.
And the way, like, it's the way you move today. It's like watching you in your working sets. I'm like, this guy moves beautifully and he's working incredibly hard.
Yeah.
Like, could he cut the the reps a little shorter and add more weight and work just as intensely? Sure. But it's, if we define the parameters of movement as we work through full range of motion, we work under these controlled like tempos, then effort is, measured relative to that.
Mm-hmm.
And a couple episodes ago, we also talked about bringing more effort to all parts of the plan that surround the actual, heavy lifts of the day. And now we're talking about, well, how do you bring some intensity or effort or focus to warm-ups and cool-downs, to keep you in the game forever, rather than just like for short stints where you're like going hard and then you got to back off because you overdid it.
Yeah, I think that's an important point, because I think that warm up and full range of motion and cool down like mean a lot of things to a lot of people. And I mean, there are some hallmarks of like putting actual intention into your warm up versus just phoning it in, right?
Mm-hmm. I've been thinking about this a lot with some of my clients that I know they're doing some of the mobility work that I'm prescribing. I'll say, hold this stretch every day for this amount of time. But I say we in the strength and conditioning world or coach world, we know that improving your mind to muscle connection or being more intentional with the movement yields better outcomes. So if you're doing a stretch while you're on your phone versus doing a stretch where you're not on your phone, your outcome probably will be different. Even if the timing is the exact same, even if seemingly you're in about the right position, that slight change of intention, is even going to yield a different outcome.
Yeah, I was just thinking about a reel I saw the other day where it's like, this is like a mobility coach. It's like, hey, if your mobility work looks like this, he's like holding the phone, scrolling. He's like, put your phone down, focus.
Yeah, it really does make a huge difference. And
yeah,
I think that we were just talking about effort and intensity, and I was kind of thinking about when I was in the clinic, was that something that I purposely wasn't prescribing to people? But I think even in the PT world, the goal of going to PT is some sort of adaptation, right? You're going to PT to elicit some sort of change to get back to some sort of function that you want. And we all know, even, PTs know this, that in order to elicit change and get a positive adaptation, there needs to be some sort of overload of stimulus, right? And so, yeah, for, in potentially an 80-year-old client doing a set of 10 straight leg raises, that might be the overload stimulus that they need in order to get the adaptation that we're trying to achieve.
Yeah.
And I think the PT has been labeled with specific exercises and this is the exact protocols that we do, but I think the underlying principle really is the same within training. It's just the tools and methods that you're using are slightly different. And again, that when I understood more about functional bodybuilding when I was here in 2019, I was like, wow, everything that functional bodybuilding is preaching is the same things that I'm preaching to my patients of focus on movement quality, be intentional with your movement, and you will get a positive adaptation in mobility or positive adaptation in more resilience in the joint that was problematic to you or in the muscles that were problematic to you. It's the same exact principles and concepts, just a different approach.
I think that that's something that functional bodybuilding as an education platform could potentially work on clarifying even more, is like the connection between the intention that you put into warm-ups, range of motion, quality of movement, and how that helps your outcomes actually get better in other areas in addition to those areas. Because I think there's sometimes a separation in people's minds where it's like, the mobility stuff is just like the Band-Aid or the homework, or it's like, oh, everyone says I got to do this, so I got to do it. But there's not that direct connection between like, oh, this could make the difference between me never front squatting again or getting to front squat and clean heavy like for as long as I want to.
Yeah.
Yeah. Go ahead.
No, You please.
Yeah, that's a great point, and I think if people can start to make the connection of, hey, if I do this stretch in my warm up, I now can do my squat way better. I can push more intensity and effort on my squat because I can get into more range of motion, and so therefore like more loading onto the tissue that I'm trying to train, or I can put more load on the bar because now the movement's more comfortable. If people can start to make that association, then yeah, that's a huge win for that individual. It's like, oh wow, I have this 1-to-1 correlation of be more intentional in my warm up, and now I get a better squat session, and that's more of, I think, what people want, what most people are looking for is like, yeah, I want a better squat session, or I want to squat more weight, or I want to do more in this lift, or do this lift for more reps. Well, the way you're going to get that is by improving some of these other variables around the training in order to be able to more safely do that for longer periods of time.
I want to run this, like, this is my kind of philosophy that I try and inject into the training. And it sort of, and I want to run it through your lens and just you poke holes at it. But I think that as you become a very, like the sign and the hallmark of like a very experienced athlete trainee that really understands what they're doing. Like this is when you're advanced, is that you do everything in the program correctly, and you do it at a high level of effort and intensity. Like, all of your weight training sets and each part of your conditioning sets, like all of them you can do essentially at maximal effort, and you don't see any compromise to like form, range of motion, following protocol. Like that's sort of like what we saw in the top CrossFit athletes. It was like Rich Froning's doing snatches, bar muscle ups, and rowing at heavy weight, high reps, under fatigue. But his last round, like the snatches look perfect, the bar muscle ups look like, the same, like, and he was a highly advanced athlete who was doing all the things correctly and doing it at a high level. The person who's a beginner, the moment they start to work high effort, they potentially compromise the quality of what they're doing, whether they're doing it right. So going from like the beginner has to just learn how to do it correctly without intensity, and the person who's an advanced trainee does everything correctly with lots of intensity. Now, the reality, and I'm going to try and get to this quickly, but the reality is that most people sit somewhere in the middle. So it is my kind of belief, philosophy that when you approach training, it's valuable for people to say, okay, in this portion of training, this is where I go ham. And then this portion of the training, this is where I'm going to back it off a little bit and focus on more of the quality so I can keep getting better here. But this is, Marcus has given me, FBB has given me the green light to really hammer it, knowing that to really hammer it in this movement, there's probably going to be some compromise for most people. Most people are not advanced trainees. They push to that 9 out of 10 and they get a little wobbly in their, technique, or they get a little wobbly in their tempo. If they do that for all 10 sets today, that's problematic. They're going to probably break down. But if they do it for 2 or 3 sets, we'll take that, calculate a risk, because that intensity is valuable in driving adaptation. But then the next sets in training, the next movements, like, hey, rethink what you're trying to accomplish here. You're not trying to accomplish the maximum. You're trying to focus on quality, range of motion. And this is where strength intensity and strength balance as terms that we use in functional bodybuilding, that's been my idea, or my philosophy, kind of like in words and in design, is like, bring it and then focus on the quality. And maybe in like 2-3 years, your strength intensity and your strength balance, the effort level can continue to rise and rise and rise, and you have less and less compromise in your form and your tempo and your techniques and all of the things that are important and keep you going. Okay, so that's what I want to say.
Yeah, when we talk about this often about purposely putting in specific exercises or movements for individuals to explore more ranges of motion or explore a slightly different movement pattern, knowing that, yeah, the intensity might not be as high as another exercise within that same movement pattern, right? Like, let's say we take the Bulgarian split squat, a great exercise to drive a really high stimulus, and you can really push the intensity on. A Cossack squat, it's hard to drive a lot of intensity on a Cossack squat, but it's a great exercise to explore a lot of range of motion, to get into slightly different positions, see where you might be having some mobility limitations. And it really, that balance is, I think, a hallmark of functional bodybuilding that allows people to, push the right amount of intensity when it's appropriate. And then, focus on some of these other characteristics of fitness that are also really important. And as you continue to improve in both of those, ideally you will be able to push intensity in both eventually. Mm-hmm. But it's just, I think that's a cornerstone of the methodology.
And somebody like a critic would say, like, well, why are you doing that like Cossack squat? Like, that's not gonna build your leg muscles. That's not gonna get you strong. Like, just focus on leg press. Like, you're much better off doing that. Or like, why would you do like that kettlebell flow? Like, that's just dumb. Like, that has no carryover to functional strength. That's not gonna. It's like, okay, these movements, the intention behind them is not to drive the most mechanical tension possible, the greatest stimulus possible to the particular muscles. It's movement exploration. It's building your movement fluency. It's giving you opportunities to explore range or work coordination or some other characteristic that in theory, and we've seen it in practice, keep people engaged longer and support building up, we'll call it 360 degree strength and muscle, like around the body. And I don't mean to like just make up a term to like sound cool, but we're kind of getting into territory of like there's a feeling that comes along with like I can do a wider range of physical tasks because I've explored them and I continue to explore them. And then when I want to get narrow and really bring intensity, we have our 20 to 30 lifts that we like to come back to and that help people to truly drive it. And those can be your benchmarks for, growth and success. And then these other movements are there for helping you maintain great range of motion, good coordination, good balance, keep your training interesting, keep your brain having to develop and learn new things in the pursuit of let's do this for many decades.
Yeah, with my clients, I call that a broad movement vocabulary. And from my PT lens, that is one more way of increasing your resilience inside and outside of the gym, right? If you have a more broad movement vocabulary where you can explore all these different positions and you have the ability to have tension or strength in those positions, when you go to do some movement that's, potentially outside of your traditional deadlift or squat, you're likely more resilient to that movement because you've explored some of these funky positions. I think a good practical example is when people are moving, they're moving from one house to the next or something like that. Lots of funky positions and funky objects that you have to move and get into in order to go through that moving process. But if you've done a conventional deadlift and a sumo deadlift and a deficit sumo deadlift and toes elevated dumbbell RDL and single leg dumbbell RDL,
a Jefferson curl.
And a Jefferson curl, right? You're far more prepared and far more resilient to each of those positions than had you only done the conventional deadlift.
Well, and also we haven't talked about sport-specific training in our conversations today, but I know that that's also a topic that's been on our minds. And having that broad movement vocabulary also lets you get outside the gym and express your physicality in Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu or rock climbing or hiking or whatever you want to take on with your body.
I think even just being a human, like your sport, quote, I'm using air quotes, your sport specific training is picking up your kid from the ground, or going into a heel sit on the ground to play with your kids, or
navigating an airport.
Yeah, right. Like there's all these funky positions that you're getting into all the time, and if you're not exploring those positions in training or in your movement practice, you're not prepared or ready to do those, and therefore your likelihood of an injury in that sort of position is higher.
Well, I think this hopefully gave everybody that was listening better insight into some of the practical programming that we put into functional bodybuilding and Persist, but also, those three kind of hallmarks, or call them rocks, of how to stay injury free and keep training consistently while bringing effort, a proper warm up, learning and training full range of motion, even as effort levels climb and climb and climb, and then allowing your body to cool down and using, static stretches or some mobility movements that you can actually perform consistently. So consistently doing all three of those things is more important than putting a ton of energy into any one of them for, a very brief period of time and then never doing them again.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I like the analogy for that concept of like flossing your teeth. People, or even brushing your teeth, for those of you that don't floss, like people are okay with the concept of brushing their teeth or flossing their teeth on a consistent basis, but it's the same concept with a consistent cool down. Like it's just, you don't have to get significantly better, or you don't have to push the intensity even greater. But if you're doing this like flossing for your body consistently, you're setting yourself up for so much success or health later on down the line.
I loved on the topic of toothbrushing, I love when I got my first Sonicare, and like it was clear to me like there's a 2-minute automatic shut off. Yeah. It's like, I just have to do the 2 minutes and I'm good.
And
like
it beeps every 30 seconds.
Yeah.
Lets you know how far.
Yeah. Mine doesn't beep like that.
Beeps.
Okay. Anyhow, it's just like, get your time in. Do floss your joints after the workout for this many minutes. Move along.
Sonicare has great programming principles.
Totally.
Like they're thinking about the customer.
Yeah.
It's great.
Cool. Well, thanks for joining us for the last 3 episodes, Adam. This is going to be the last one we have with you for maybe a little bit, but we'd love to have you back. And if you guys have any questions for Adam, you are welcome to send them through us, Marcus and Satya, through our DMs. You can try and slide into Adam's DMs. He's not as responsive as maybe I am or Satya has been, but he's getting his Instagram game better. What is your handle?
It's Adam_Fetter.
Adam_Fetter. At Adam_Fetter. We'll have that linked down in the show notes wherever you're listening to this. And any last final words that you want to say?
Yeah, no, I will. I'll be more intentional to check my messages. So if you guys are gonna send any messages, I'll check at a higher frequency for the time being and make sure I can respond to all of y'all.
Awesome. Thank you for being here. All right. See y'all next time.